Clare Wuellner, your host for Parenting Beyond Belief. And with me today are my two co-hosts, Janet Heimlich, who authored the book Breaking Their Will, and Dale McGowan, who has authored Parenting Beyond Belief, which is why we get to name this show this. And I'm sorry, Dale, I'm already blanking. Help me out. What are the titles of your other two books? I've read them. My brain.
That's fine. Raising Free Thinkers
Thank
and
you.
In Faith and in Doubt.
Right. I should write them down. Dang it. All right. And so we are just going live right after the show that we just did. We took a little food break, and now we're back. On the previous show, we talked a little bit about International Day of the Girl Child, and I want to develop that a little bit more. We will do a show about parenting boys, but right now, the thing that I was thinking about when I was reading all of the information about International Day of the Girl Child is how religion influences how girls in particular are parented. There's very much, in some religions especially, a different set of rules for girls than for boys. And those rules, even though I understand them to be not so great, they still infiltrate our culture and the way I have parented at times accidentally. And I wanted to talk about that and where they are, how to weed them out. And then also just talking about bodily autonomy, the messages we send girls about sex, and how religion has flavored that a lot. There's a lot to talk about here. I also want to play a game, which we'll do later, and then take calls. So if you have a question about secular parenting, our number is 512-686-0279. Give us a call, and we will answer your question to the best of our abilities. You really have two amazing parenting experts here. Give a call. You won't regret it.
I would say three.
Three? Oh, well.
Because you're a great parent. That makes you a parenting
Thank you.
expert.
I don't know if I'm an expert. I certainly try. I tell my kids I screw up all the time, but I'm really, really trying hard to do the right thing. And that right there is a parenting tip. You screw up, admit it. Okay. So, Jan, let's start with you, because you know better than any of the three of us. You know better than the other two of us that the way girls are parented in certain religions are really quite awful, even worse than the way I think boys are parented, personally. You might disagree with that. But talk about what those sorts of things are, and maybe get into where those things have become so culturally ingrained that they seep in where we don't want them. Yeah?
Yeah, they sure do. I think that if certain ways of raising girls are going to benefit a religious culture in some way, usually meaning those who are in charge, then you're bound to see that happening in general culture as well. I do want to give the caveat that you're really going to see these problems more in conservative environments. You don't have the same kind of controls that are put on girls in more progressive, more moderate environments. So, these kind of problems that we'll be talking about, they're going to exist in what I call religious authoritarian cultures, very conservative to very conservative authoritarian cultures. So I think that holds true also in general society, where it's going to be very much frowned upon, say here in liberal Austin, than it would be in more conservative, perhaps rural or suburban areas. But I'm always amazed at how much of the religious messaging, as it relates to girls, has to do with such intimate, private things about sexuality. Mm-hmm. It's just it makes me cringe all the time to be talking. I mean, just you know, the idea of putting a girl on display in some way, whether it's you know, and this is true in I think just about every religious community, as well as secular, where there's some kind of announcement, lots of money spent on announcing to the world that she's ready to wed. She's crossed over some kind of, she's gotten her period. She's, you know, she's ready to be devout to somebody and marry them. And it just seems like, to me, so obvious that you're looking at a child as property when you go through this universal thing, you know, where, okay, we're at this age, therefore that means baptism, or that means the coming out ritual and that kind of a thing. I mean, it's based on such archaic types of structures in those communities, and yet no one bats an eye. Because they're just so used to going through that. But anyway, that whole idea of we're going to be making this such a public thing, when in fact you're talking about such intimate, emotional, or even biological things going on in a girl's body, and then you have. That's what's said to the outer religious community, but in terms of what's said to children directly, to girls directly, those kinds of religious messages are often in preparation for that time, and so much of it is geared toward controlling a girl's life so that she is going to fit within the agenda of the religious community or system. And we can talk more about specifically what those are, but I think I'll let Dale speak a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think the points that you're touching on are just exactly right. It's one of the things that we had to do for all of our kids, for all of our parenting, right at the beginning, is sort of sit down. And my wife was Christian for the first half of our marriage, first 13 years, but progressive Christian, very liberal Christian. And so we had to sit down and figure out what we were all about. What were the messages that we wanted to get through to our kids? What were the ways that we wanted to talk about sexuality? What were the gender messages that we wanted to get across? And she comes from an extended family that's quite conservative. And so those messages were in the water. A lot of those things that you were touching on are, were in the water for her, but they were not the messages that she embraced by the time she was in her 20s. So it was much easier than it might otherwise have been for us to do that. But sitting down, one of the really nice things about a mixed marriage, I must say, is that you have to be intentional about things. And there's actually been some good research done for this, that when you have parents from two different religious perspectives, they have, there's actually a term for it, dyadic consensus. They have a particular strength in something that's called dyadic consensus, which is the ability of the two parents to come to agreement in issues of importance in the marriage or in parenting. And parents from two different religious perspectives show greater strength in dyadic consensus than parents from the same perspective, because they so often have to sit down and work things out. You have to say it out loud. If you're coming from the same perspective, you make assumptions. You just assume that you're on the same page, and then you sort of discover in the course of crossing the creek that that you actually aren't there. So that was something that we did constantly, just touching base and talking about things like that. So when it came to raising our girls and gender expectations and sexuality and all those sorts of things, we were very overt and intentional about it and talking to each other so that we knew where we stood. And we both came down on the side of authoritative parenting, which is the one that research supports as well, not authoritarian parenting. And as you said, a lot of that intersects in sexuality and these very personal things, autonomy, which also has a huge overlay in sexuality, but goes into other areas as well. So yeah, it's being intentional with it, whether or not the two of you share the same worldview, is highly recommended.
Yes. And my husband and I had the same sort of conversations on many things, even though we were both non-religious. What prompted us to do it was the fact that he was so close to that religiosity, that extreme upbringing that he felt was really injurious. He was quite traumatized by his upbringing, so he wanted to be very clear about what we did and did not do. My Catholic upbringing certainly did quite a bit of damage, but I wasn't as scarred as he was. I don't bear the resentment towards the religion that he bears towards his religion. So, yeah, we had to have those clarifying conversations, and I'm super glad we did, because it made some things very much easier.
That's wonderful that you did. I was thinking back to my childhood, which was, I call it watered-down Judaism. This was nothing anyone seemed to ever think about or do much about. We had a Christmas tree in our living room every year, and
because Christmas trees are awesome.
So beautiful. And, you know, we were never, we were only sent to go to synagogue usually on Passover, and we were taken by a couple that were friends with my parents. My parents seemed to have no interest in it. But unfortunately, their rather hands-off, lackadaisical attitude about raising us with kind of nothing, translated also into not doing much thinking about much else. It was all by default. And so as a result, whereas my twin sister and I were not told to think a certain way about our genitals or our sexuality or how we should perceive ourselves as girls. You know, we didn't have that shoved down our throats. There was more neglect on that part. There were no questions about how do we feel about the way that this boy at school is treating us? How do we feel about ourselves as girls? And no questions as we got older about how we felt about relationships with others, with members of the opposite sex. All those needed discussions just simply didn't take place. So I was just, you know, on this blank canvas all the time, and, you know, rarely really understanding these very big issues and how they might have been impacting my life. So, you know, those discussions are hard to have, and I think that many parents in religious communities who find it uncomfortable to have them can easily fall back on some kind of prescribed teaching method of how they're supposed to communicate with their kids because, well, oh, look, we can avoid talking about menstruation. Oh, goody. We didn't want to have to, you know, they're, you know, and boys too, but since we were focusing on girls, these are uncomfortable discussions to be had, especially if the parents did not grow up in a community that wanted to be open about them. And so as a result, I struggle with my daughter, who's so much more sexually aware than I've ever been in my life. Fortunately, she's, you know, this really outgoing, inquisitive person who finds out what she needs to find out on her own if I'm ignoring the issues that I shouldn't be ignoring. But, you know, I do find myself struggling to find ways to talk about a lot of these things relating to sexuality, being a girl, and so forth, because I wasn't given tools as a child.
Right, right. Oh my gosh, my brain's going everywhere because there's so many things to cover here. There's the fact that I was so privileged because I I had a partner, and he still feels his Southern Baptist conservatism when it comes to talking about sex and sexuality. So, and I'm completely comfortable with it. So, I have actually played games of, was it Cards Against Humanity with my kids because they wanted to play it. They'd seen the videos on YouTube, and they knew people were laughing, but they didn't quite know why. And so we just played it, and the other adults who were with me at the time, including my husband, would just look at me as I would explain blowjob or whatever else the cards would say. Because, if you act like it's something to be ashamed of and be uncomfortable at it, that sends a message, first of all. And if you don't talk about it at all, where are they going to learn about it? Good God, that prompts me to speak up more than anything. I want them to get the lowdown on it. And among other things, one of the things that I want them to get was something that religion absolutely robbed me of, and that was that sex is pleasurable. In Catholicism, sex is something that girls are to avoid at all costs. Virginity is paramount. Oh my gosh. My mother told me about when she was first married to my father, they'd pray the entire rosary before they'd go to bed at night. And she said, if that doesn't put you in the mood, I don't know what does. And it's just crazy, right? The messages were very sterilized. The only talk that I got, per se, was a book about human sexuality. And my father told me later on he was really proud of the fact that he handed me that book because it's more than he ever got. And I thought, well, okay, good for you, Dad. But talk about real things was just not a comfortable topic. So there's that. And also how fortunate we are. I guess we're on sexuality, so let's kind of stay here for just a little bit. If you have a child who has been sexually abused, or there's any sort of difficult background there, it changes the game. And I guess I can tell a story. I was in a parent-led preschool with a bunch of my friends. Unbeknownst to us, one of the boys had been molested by his older sibling, and the parent didn't tell us this, which isn't that we would have kicked her out or anything. It was that we would have had greater awareness and paid attention more. But when you don't know, you don't know. And so this child essentially gave all the children the virus of playing doctor. It took a hell of a long time to weed that out of all of the kids' behavior.
I'm not sure I understand when you say gave them the virus of playing doctor.
This child taught them to be interested in looking at other children's genitals. And so it took us a while to be able to not have to worry about them being alone and quiet for too long, because you just knew somebody was pulling somebody's pants down. It was really difficult. I had the extreme good fortune. One of my very best friends is a child sexuality counselor, and she talked me off the ledge so many times and helped me through it. But not everybody's that lucky. So there's that. And wow, I really went off into the weeds there. Excuse me. I would like to talk more about...
But I don't want to dismiss that, but because when there is sexual abuse, these kinds of messaging are even more harmful. I'm going to have trouble remembering all the names, but after Elizabeth Smart, the daughter of Mormon family, who she was abducted and raped repeatedly over a course of, 9 months or something. And there's a book that came out. Someone may remember the name of the author because it's escaping me now, but it was called Under the Banner of Heaven, if I have that right. He wrote that. I hope it's the same book I'm talking about. But he actually, the book is about a serial murder case. I mean, that took place in the LDS Church. But what's interesting is the writer spent a chapter talking about the Elizabeth Smart case. It really wasn't too related to the crime, the murder crime. But what he was trying to get people to understand was that the religious messaging that Elizabeth Smart was raised in the LDS Church made her an even more likely victim when she was kidnapped and then was repeatedly raped by her perpetrator. She was rather defenseless. Mm-hmm. Not only was she act, behave as a perfect victim for him, because she was going to question everything about her own sexuality, mm-hmm. her own possible being, an accomplice in this, and carry that shame. That prevented her from having the wherewithal to get away from mm-hmm. him. And she does talk about, the struggles of shame and so forth that she carried with her for a very long time after the case. So I'm just saying that when you do have a child who has been sexually abused, they are given no tools to survive something like that, or to react in a way that is going to keep them safe, such as fending off the adult, such as reporting on the adult. All of those things work against the child protecting herself.
Right. And in our society as a whole, I think that shame is not the exclusive property, so to speak, of religion. That shame is kind of out there, and I feel like secular parenting is moving in the right direction. And positive, being sex positive, what that means and what that doesn't mean is another topic. Dale, did you have anything to add real quickly? And then before we go to a caller, did you have any? Yeah.
No, I really wouldn't add anything to that. I would just reinforce what you're saying, and it's interesting what you just said about secular parenting and its approach to sexuality. It's interesting to think that if the religious approach to sexuality was less problematic, it may not even be such a point of emphasis in non-religious parenting. It could be something that would just, you would behave toward it in the way that we behaved toward every other aspect of human experience. But a lot of people coming out of these really problematic subcultures need to, as parents, they have to, like you said with the Cards Against Humanity, was a perfect example. We had the same experience. My wife is an atheist and a humanist, but because she grew up in a relatively conservative Southern Baptist home and was still religious for years as an adult, she was really uncomfortable with that game, which our kids gave to her for Mother's Day. So
that is rich.
The really wonderful thing is that she had to play it.
Oh my gosh!
Wow.
And it was just, and she had to be appreciative and all this sort of thing. And I think this was several years ago. I actually think at this point we could all sit down with the kids being older and all that, and it would be fine. But it is amazing how long it takes to shake that messaging and to try to be comfortable with your own kids and to not pass that anxiety to them, even if you've mentally transcended it yourself. There's still that residue that can be there. So, everything you said about it, I agree with.
I wanted to say I looked up the book. It is Under the Banner of Heaven by John Krakauer.
Right.
Oh, John Krakauer. Right
Yeah.
on. We have a call from someone we've talked to previously. Hopefully y'all remember he goes by Pine Snake, spoke to Dale previously, and he has an update about religion in schools. Y'all ready?
Oh, great. Yeah.
Hey, Pine Snake.
Hey, people. How are you doing?
Good, and you?
I'm really good, thanks.
All right. So what's your update?
Well, after speaking to the panel before, I reapproached the school and put some of the points and concerns to them in the way that was suggested.
I remember this conversation, and I'm fascinated to hear the update, but would you give our viewers just a quick backgrounder on this issue, please?
Yeah, basically and quickly, it was the school that my children go to were forcing Christian beliefs as fact upon the children, no matter what denomination the children were, and they were getting in trouble for not bowing their heads in prayer and things like this. And the panel suggested that I basically got the rules and had a look to see what the actual rules were. And it turns out because it's a state school with no religious affiliation, they had to be balanced in their approach to religion. And since then, because I pointed this out, they've put a temporary halt on the prayers in the morning, and they are also having guest speakers come in on one day a week, and actually it might be a Muslim or Hindu or...
I got to do a happy dance here. This is just too awesome. Oh my gosh. That is awesome.
And better news still, they're actually looking for a secular person to come in and discuss secular humanism.
Oh,
so that might be atheist or agnostic.
Wow, congrats to you for raising that awareness and it being so instrumental in
what a difference you've made.
Congratulations.
It's really fantastic. And I've got to say that I've heard similar stories happen including in some of the most unlikely places. People come up against some sort of infuriating thing in terms of religion in the classroom. And I recommend they look into the policies of the school or the district or the state that they're in. And I'm in Georgia, for crying out loud. I am in Atlanta. And when we ran into difficulties, we looked at the requirements of our county. And it turns out they're really good. They're very even-handed. Mm-hmm. And so even in some of the reddest areas, you'll find that a lot of the policies on the books are going to support you. And when you take that to an administrator, this is the kind of results you can get. You end up getting very frequently the kind of relief that you're looking for. The nonsense localizes itself in the classroom frequently, but as soon as you sort of let in the light and get at the policies and talk to the people a little higher up in the administration, you can get this kind of result. I'm just thrilled to hear that happened for you. Congratulations.
Yeah, it really helped that I also approached the other parents because there are Muslim and Hindu children that go to the school that I were aware of. So I approached their parents and says, are you happy with this? And they're now more happy with a well-rounded education rather than one specific. Mm-hmm. So it's definitely a win-win.
An education versus a non-education.
Right on. Yeah. I have to ask, how are your kids doing with all this? Has there been any blowback or pats on the back? Or
there's been no particular blowback. They're more in primary school, so that's 4 to 11 years old.
Mm-hmm. You're paving the way for...
Yeah, they don't really have a huge understanding. But yeah, they had a Buddhist in this week gone, and most of the kids really loved it. The whole idea of the philosophy of Buddhism. They enjoyed the assembly in the morning, which is normally droll and boring, with 60-year-old men stood at the front boring everyone.
Yes.
Yeah. So, everybody wins, like you said. Everybody wins. That's great.
For years to come, the impact you have had, I just think on down the road, the teachers, the children, and the children that they will raise. It's just amazing. That's fantastic. You have made my month. It's awesome.
Happy to oblige.
Right.
I think it points to that when you're in an environment that's not super conservative or, really, directed at just a certain way and really extremist, in this case, a state school, that very often these kinds of religious messaging don't have a big agenda behind it or are well thought out at all. It's just people continuing what they know, and so they
fall into it. Yeah,
they don't see a need to question it, and oftentimes it's just raising something that everyone can get on board with, because I'm going to guess most people, and in conversations I have with a lot of moderates, I mean, most people do believe it's important for children to be educated about different religions. They, I think that's the wide swath of people who are in moderate, mainstream culture. So who could argue with that?
Right.
But yet it's such a big win, because so many parents, and I'm sure that this was not an easy thing all the way around, but for most parents, I think they would have found it just too intimidating to even think about raising it to the powers that be. So again, good on you.
Right on. Thank you so much for calling back with that update. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate it.
No, it's truly a pleasure to speak to you all.
Right on. And if you have any other questions, call us back. We'd love to hear from you.
Definitely will do that.
All right.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Take good care.
Take care.
You too. Bye.
Oh, I have to do a little more dancing. That's just so awesome. Oh, my gosh. Yeah, you can win, and it doesn't have to be hard, and it doesn't have to be this giant battle.
Right.
It can just be like, look at the rules.
Yeah, and it's really important the reason I bring up the Georgia is a lot of people will hear a story like that and dismiss it and say, oh, yeah, well, he's in the UK. It's a different situation. I'm in this conservative area. But I cannot tell you how often you actually dig in like this and find the support that you need. So do it.
Right.
Because those policies had to have been passed. It went sometimes by the general population, not just a school board. And generally speaking, people want a secular approach. They want an ecumenical approach. They want children to learn not just about one worldview. So I think that's probably would be the case in just about every public school situation here and the UK.
Right on. Cool. Shall we play our game? Shall we play a game?
Let's do.
This one's called Tales from the Crib. And that name is especially for Kendall Hopkins, who's one of our other hosts. She is into creepy things, so that's for you. Tales from the Crib. And so what this game basically is that each of us have thought about some story from our past having to do with parenting that was either entertaining or embarrassing or educational for you all. So who wants to go first? Jan?
I want to think of a better one.
You want to think of a better one. Dale. He said he had a lot.
Yeah, when Claire said to think about this, I have an awful lot of stories, but I thought of one about 3 minutes long that relates to my daughter, who is now 20, but it happened when she was 10. And she came to me and said that she wanted to wear something to school, but she said, it makes me feel weird to wear it. I don't know if I should. And I said, well, what is it you're thinking about wearing? I thought it was some like spaghetti strap thing or whatever, because they're freakishly weird about that here.
Yeah.
But she opened her hand and she slowly revealed this pendant necklace, and at the end of it was a cross.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember that she bought this at the dollar store when we were on vacation in Florida. And I said, well, why does it make you feel weird? And she said, well, I feel weird wearing it when I don't really believe in God, like I'm not being honest. And this was not what I expected. I thought it was going to be, okay, Dad's an atheist and, you know, that kind of thing. But she felt like she wasn't being honest. And she said, but I just like to wear it. Mm-hmm. And I said, I go out of my way to try to find ways to allow things, you know, rather than disallow. I want them to have experiences. So I said, it's fine, sweetie. It's a pretty necklace. But there was something else she was not telling me. I could tell. And she said, well, it also makes me feel good to wear it. Mm. And I thought, okay, there's at least one unfortunate way to read that sentence.
Yeah.
So I said, you mean it makes you feel like a good person to wear a cross? Uh-huh. And she said, oh, no, of course not. She said, it makes me feel good to rub it. And I had been ready for that sentence for years. But the context was all wrong. So
that's awesome.
So what she said, when I'm worried, I rub it with my fingers and it makes the worry go away. So it was like a little, little talisman. And I said, because I had a jade worry stone.
Worry stone, yes.
Middle stone, yeah.
Right.
And I was same kind of thing. It made me feel better. I'd be in a test or something like that. I had that. And her cross wasn't about God. In fact, she was worried that people would think it was. Mm-hmm. So I said, I think you should wear it, see what it feels like. And then you can decide. So she wore it for a week and she decided it wasn't for her. And she took it off. She didn't wear it again. But the thing is that then she knew it wasn't for her. Right. And if I had disallowed it at the beginning, if I had said, no, you really shouldn't do that, and, for whatever reason, she would never have known. But because she had the experience and had this harmless, active experience, she was able to know what that thing would feel like. And I've just tried to duplicate that in as many ways as possible. And especially with her, she's kind of a big one for experiencing things and then sort of incorporating it into her own values. So there's my story.
Cool. All right.
Well, I'll launch in. So when my daughter Maxine was in kindergarten, and we live in Austin, we were reading Dan Barker's book, Let's Pretend. Sorry, I'm saying this again. I hope that's the title. I will double check it when I'm done, like I did John Krakauer's book. Anyway, it's a fun book with great illustrations, and it talks about or encourages the child to question how rational religious beliefs are. And to get there, it starts with talking about Santa Claus and how rational that belief is. And she loved the book. We were reading it every night for weeks. And it's just so much fun. And there was one afternoon I went to pick her up at the end of school, and the kindergarten teacher went like this and asked me to follow her in the back. She says, Maxine is telling the other students that God doesn't exist, and she's also telling them that Santa Claus doesn't exist. And the first thing's okay. It's okay that she's telling them that God doesn't exist, but if she keeps telling them Santa Claus doesn't exist, you're going to be getting a lot of angry emails. And I thought, well, that's pretty much a testament to liberal Austin, for one. Yeah. But it also, reminds me of conversations I've gotten into with secular parents who are very comfortable with talking about atheism with their kids, but they still want to carry across the myth of Santa Claus. They and I don't really hold a big judgment about that. I just find that to be in such conflict to me. For me, my choice was based on the fact that it's completely impossible for me to tell my daughter something that I know to be untrue. I mean, unless it's for for her benefit, to protect her in some way. But that's such a rarity that I've ever. I mean, she doesn't know that I got tickets to Panic at the Disco, and I'm just like, it's everything for me to just hold this in for a few months because I'm going to tell her about that over the holidays. I mean, I have a very open relationship with her. But so I could never bring myself to just carry along that lie about Santa Claus. But yeah, I have gotten into discussions with a lot of parents who feel that same way, that, well, we understand that you wouldn't want to say this supernatural force exists, but
Santa Claus don't.
But what's the harm? And they actually oftentimes will sound very upset and angry that I didn't tell her that there is a Santa Claus. So I always found that to be really perplexing.
Well, everybody does it their own way. My story is not the least bit highbrow. Y'all had highbrow stories. My story is the point of it. The educational point of it is to let people know who have one kid that every kid is incredibly different, and it's nothing you're doing. Okay, so my son was born, and he didn't sleep. He ate constantly. He required being moved and done stuff all the time. If you were in the car and the light turned red, you just went as slowly as possible and hoped to God it turned green before you got there, because if the car stopped, he'd start crying. He just had to be on the move all the time physically. As far as toys went, all those little toys that they sell you to stimulate the child, black and white and red, and here are the cushy books and the things that make noise and all that stuff. I thought it was a big ruse to sell you lots of things and take your money, because I would hand them to my son and he'd be like, I want to play with you. That's all he wanted to play with from the very, very beginning. And I got pregnant with my daughter, and I thought, dear God, if she's like this, I'm going to just die, because I can't maintain that energy level for two. Oh my goodness, my daughter was so different. She could sit and play with one of those toys that my son would have nothing to do with for an hour or two, just manipulating it and doing things with it. And it was such a revelation to me, so different. But it could get me in trouble sometimes, because she's quiet. She's just playing with something, and it's quiet. So once in a while, she'd be being quiet for too long. And this is where the story gets quite classic. I walked into the bedroom, and she was sitting on the floor. And you know that heavy Eucerin skin cream, the stuff that's really thick? She had opened the lid and she wasn't walking or crawling yet. She was still sitting, but she was a big kid. And she had painted everything within her reach, including the boom box, and a chair, a fabric chair with the Eucerin everywhere. And she was just so pleased with herself. So kids are, if you have one and you're just about to tear your hair out, the next one, it could be totally different. Or the other way around. You could have a super easy one, and the next one, sorry. So anyway, that's my story. Not nearly as highbrow, sorry.
No.
Anyhow.
I think that your son and my daughter have had a lot of similarities when she was a baby.
Yeah.
That first year.
And he still requires constant input. He's very extroverted. If he's in a crowd with people, he's just on fire. That's just who he is.
Oh, she turned out to be the opposite.
Right? She is.
She just said to me today, this is perfect that you're going out on a trip, because I've just been dying to just spend time by myself at home, and this really will give me a chance to do that. So, bye. It's fine.
Nice.
I'm good.
Nice. Wow. How about that? It looks like we have another call. And let me see if I have any information about what it's going to be. This is from Chelsea, and she's asking about holiday and religious traditions, etc. So, hey, Chelsea, you're on the air.
Everybody.
Hey.
Hi, Chelsea.
With Janet and Dale.
Hi.
How are you doing?
I'm okay. How are y'all doing?
I'm great.
Feel good.
Awesome. So I thought, since the holidays are coming, this is a pretty pertinent question. So, like a lot of people, my family is very religious, and we've got Thanksgiving coming up, and I'm already thinking about the whole blessing thing before they eat. My daughter's 4, so she's going to be pretty interested as to what they're doing and why they're doing it. Normally, I don't participate. I just kind of let them do their thing and kind of just, I'm quiet and respectful and just wait. So now I'm wondering, so what if she asks, well, Mommy, why don't you hold hands, or why don't you say whatever they're saying? What would be the best way to approach this kind of situation with a kid that young, but she's very observant and she wants to know everything?
Chelsea, would this be the first time that she would have witnessed prayer or that kind of a ritual?
I don't think so. I just think that she's of the age now where she wants to know what everybody's doing and why. She's very inquisitive now, so it might be something that she'll ask about.
Right. I have a suggestion for you. Have you talked to her about these kinds of things before, in terms of how other people might be religious or act out rituals and things like that? Have you had a discussion like that with her today?
No, not yet. It really hasn't come up. The only time we've talked about religion, my parents got remarried not too long ago in a Catholic church, and she wanted to know what was up with the guy in the dress.
I want one too. That's really pretty.
Yeah. Good,
Yeah,
good. Well,
exactly.
she sounds like an amazing child. My suggestion to you would be, since you have plenty of time, to talk to her about it. If you know this is going to be happening, not in a way of, okay, this bad thing might happen. I think it's just more discussion about how different families behave differently at the dinner table. And some families are like us, and, we come together, we have a nice time together, we enjoy our food and so forth. And other families, they do that too. But some families will take a minute to be really quiet, and someone may be talking a little bit and talking about God, or talking about how the food we should be, whatever words you think, would likely be said. And just kind of prepare her that that's one of the things that might happen that's different than what your family does at home, and see if she has any questions about that. She might very well have questions about it, and there's certainly nothing wrong at all for her to be inquisitive about it. But if, I tried to do this with my child when I knew ahead of time that she was going to see something that was really new and different to her. Certainly if it was going to be, shocking or scary, but in this case, it's not that.
Right.
That I would just prepare her for it and let her know that, this sometimes happens, and we'll probably see that happen when we get together with the folks. Really just that. And then, if she has any questions, of course, she can take it further. She may not even find it interesting. But I think that just letting her know ahead of time it might be a nice thing. So I guess I always, when I was a child, I didn't necessarily like the feeling of something happening that everyone's partaking in something and I don't know what's going on. It was uncomfortable for me as a kid.
I agree.
Like I was supposed to know about this, but I didn't. So that's another thought I have on that.
Yeah, she's definitely the same way.
Dale?
Yeah, just what Jan said. I talk about it in advance, and it's an exciting thing. It's an opportunity for anthropology. This is the way my kids always saw it. It's actually to see humans in their natural habitat doing what humans do. And you talk about the fact age 4 is by no means too early to be talking about this and say different people believe different things. There are some things that we know about the world, and then different people believe different things about some of the things that we don't know, about what happens after we die, about whether there's a God and all that. And you say, or I said very forthrightly, I don't think there's a God, but some of the people who are going to be at Thanksgiving do think there's a God, and they will sometimes say a prayer, which is a way of asking God for something or thanking God for something during the meal. Isn't that interesting? And the great thing is that you can learn about what they believe. You can learn about what I believe and other people believe, and then you get to make your own choice. You get to decide on your own. So if you set them up in that way, in a way that's positive and interested, you know, because it's something that if you have a curious child, everything should be interesting. You know, it should be an opportunity to see the texture of the world and to see the texture of human life. So set it up that way, and then invite them to, you know, to ask questions. It kind of, you know, it'll freak out the adults, but that's rarely a bad thing. You know,
that's part of the fun of it, actually, I think.
Because yes, age four is magic for that.
Yeah.
They have no guile whatsoever. They'll just ask the question, and it sort of knocks, you know, the adults off their guard, and it's charming.
Yeah.
And it can really open things up and relax things. So yeah, just as Jan said, talk in advance, look at it like, you know, an opportunity to see this cool different thing, and then you get to, you know, think about it and make up your own mind.
Chelsea, quick question about that. I'd like to know what your family's reaction might be if or expectations that they might have about whether your daughter would participate in that or not. Do you think that they would be fully accepting of however she chose to be, whether it's putting your hands together to just see what that's like, or whether it's just wanting to sit there and make funny faces at you while it's happening, or whatever that is? Do you think that they would be respectful and accepting of her response, or do you think there would be any kind of, you know, trying to instruct her that she should do it as well, or anything concerning to you about their response?
I'm not very concerned. They're pretty open-minded people. They're very accepting of whatever she chooses to do, or they've always been pretty accepting of everything. So I don't foresee any negativity with anything that she decides to do. So thankfully, I know it could be a lot worse, but thankfully, I don't see any negativity coming from them.
Good. Wonderful.
Yeah, and I'll tell you that those debriefings before you go to relatives' houses, mine are 13, 15. We still have them on the way to Nana and Papa's, because there's always, at every age, there's a new thing that might need to be addressed. And at the very least, what we always remind them is to knock off with the cursing and the oh gods and stuff like that.
Right.
There's always going to be something to address before you go into, as Dale says, do your anthropological experimentation and adventure. So yeah, it's definitely that. You look at how they do it.
Great question and very timely.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much, and I'll definitely do that. And after Thanksgiving, I'll call the show back and let you know how it went.
Oh, that'd be super.
Oh, good.
Can't
Perfect.
wait.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chelsea.
Absolutely.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Oh, yeah. And then you get into Christmas, and with the Southern Baptist, my mother-in-law is the Martha Stewart of her county.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, and she does Christmas upright. I want to go there for Christmas because she does it so well. You come up to the house on the hill with the wreaths all over it, and the giant dining room table is stem to stern candies and cookies and stuff, and everything's decorated to the nth. And there are parties, and there's the tradition of reading from the Bible and also the Christmas story the night on the Christmas Eve, and all sorts of things. And we've had to have some conversations with them that were really tricky because they didn't know that we were atheist for a long time. And so when it came to the reading of the stories, Nana just lives for the Christmas story and the Santa Claus and all that stuff. And I said, you know, we teach our kids to look at religion with an equal interest in all of them. And at this point, we're teaching Christianity. They know about Buddhism. They know about Judaism. They know about all the religions. They're taught about all of them. And so I don't remember exactly how I put it, but I said, so for them, these are stories at this point, and at some point we expect that they will form opinions and make a decision about what's compelling to them. And my mother-in-law, for all the stories I tell about her, she's actually quite wonderful. So directly after that, when they did the biblical reading on New Year's Eve, she finished with reading it, and she turned to my kids, because they were the smallest, they were the youngest, and said, "Isn't that a wonderful story?" And I just, wow. I just love her so much. She really gives her all in trying to respect what her son and I want to do in terms of parenting. I'm very fortunate that way. I know that not all parents are that way, grandparents and such. But she's pretty darn wonderful in that way. Yeah, there are lots of good Christmas stories with my in-laws, but maybe I'll save them for Tales from the Crib later on or something.
And she was reading a story from the Bible when she said that, or the night before Christmas?
The story from the Bible, the eve of Christ's birth, whichever part of the Bible that is, because I don't have it memorized. The
gospel stories.
Gospel stories. The child is born, the star is bright, the people visit, etc.
Yeah.
Okay, so when you first said that question that she asked, I didn't respond immediately the same way, because I was focusing more on her, like, kind of this assumption that she had that they would love the story. I think what you're meaning is that she used the word story,
yeah,
as opposed to making it seem like it really happened.
It's fact to her.
Yeah. I feel, though, that a lot of stories in the Bible means something so very different to children than they do to adults. That the adults that appreciate those stories, that think that they're wonderful, don't often understand that kids are just either thinking they resonate zero, or it seems a little weird, or sometimes kind of scary, like at Passover, hearing hearing about, the angel of death and smiting all the firstborn, and the babies are dead and everything. And so that question, I think, was not the ideal question to ask. I think you were probably so grateful that she wasn't making it more of a, ideological thing.
Right.
But so even better, it would have been, what did you think of that story?
Right.
So I tend to, be very, very much, and we heard stories read to us from the Torah, even though I've talked about my background being watered down Judaism. We did celebrate Passover. I don't even like the word celebrate for that, because I don't think that's a healthy there's not a healthy message in that. But when you're around the dining room table and there may be 20 people there and we're reading from it, and no one ever said, isn't that a wonderful story? I actually didn't quite know what people thought of it. It was just read every year. So they were paying homage to it in some way. I never could figure out as a kid why. Is this, obviously it's important, but I didn't understand why. It was like no discussion about, so again, it was just this assumption that everyone would be on board with this idea. It was important and a good story, but I never thought it was a good story, and I certainly never got why it was important.
Yeah. And, the whole...
So, I mean, if a parent says, isn't that a wonderful story, it's not really a question.
Yeah.
And the child's answer, really, there's very little wiggle room for the child to be like,
They
no?
They did they didn't quite know how to respond to it, as I recall. They were like, yeah, that's fine, whatever. They were, I think, maybe 3 and 5 at the time, so young enough to go, yeah, whatever, Grandma, let's get some cookies. It's not too much, but just that she was willing to.
And I'm speaking because obviously I'm not talking specifically about that incident, which I know so little about. I'm just saying that generally speaking, I think that so many times adults will it's. I mean, when taken to an extreme, it's a form of exploitation, but a form of abuse. But generally speaking, parents very often who are religious need to check in with how they feel about rituals and question children about how they feel about the rituals. And, it doesn't all have to be done a certain way. And yes, continue those rituals if they're important to you, but at least think about why are they important to you and how might your children perceive them.
Right. That's not something that's exactly encouraged. At least it wasn't in my upbringing as a Catholic to ask those questions. And I'm pretty sure that's most people's experience in hardcore religion.
Yeah.
It's like, questions? Oh, no. And it's pretty clear to me from the awkward silences or difficulty with asking questions that I run into with my
kids do have
in-law.
to be asked, because if they're quiet, adults tend to assume they're good.
Yeah, and that's not true.
That's oftentimes the opposite.
Right on. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dale, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
On which aspect of it?
Well, just the idea, the when rituals, holiday rituals, and things like that go on, parents just assuming that all the kids are on board with it because the adults are on board with it, and thinking, glorifying, certain messages or rituals, things like that.
Yeah, I honestly have found, at least with my kids and a lot of the parents I've talked to, that the thing that kids need is a touch point outside of the religious environment. And so kids can go in and experience a lot of this religious messaging and expectation and all that. And as long as they have the ability to see this other adult that's important in their lives, who has a different perspective and is able to just offer this separate point of view, it can put an awful lot into perspective, and they can handle an awful lot of messaging. Now, it can cross a line, like you referred to Passover. It's a hideous story. It's an absolutely hideous story, and but it's something that a lot of people don't even think about. They don't even think about the nature of this story because they're so used to hearing it in this.
The adults don't, but as a child, I definitely did. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. The children, right. Mm-hmm. So what they need to have is somebody who can have a conversation with them, separately from it, and say, ooh, that story, when I think about that story, it's a little creepy. Did that freak you out, or whatever it is? So you can be, it's less often that we need to protect them from the messaging, in many cases, not counting the extremes. In many cases, providing the additional point of view can do a great deal. When it moves into the really, as I said, the terrifying, the fear thought stuff, that's something else. That's something we really need to try to protect them from. But there's an awful lot that they can process if they're just allowed to have somebody else to talk to who has a different point of view, and they know that not everyone in the world thinks that story is reality.
Mm-hmm. Right on. We have a caller with an extremely good question. I'm excited. It's how to handle grandparents who insist on telling scary Bible stories to the grandchild.
Oh, this is what we were just on. Yeah.
Epic. Yes. John, are you there?
Yes.
You're on the air with Claire and Janet and Dale. You had a question for us?
Yes. I have a 5-year-old daughter, and both my parents are alive. They live in Austin. They are frequently helping with watching my daughter when we need help, and that happens at least once or 2, 3, 4 times a month. And what happens though is when they watch her, is the thing they love more than anything else to read her is Bible stories. My parents are Catholic, but they're kind of a very specific niche of Catholic, which is, super enthusiastic about the Bible, love to whack people over the head with it. And what happens is that last year was the first time my daughter came home from my parents' house, and it was raining heavily, and she started crying and saying, "We're all going to die." And I said, where did you get this? And she said, "Well, God flooded the world." And she started telling me about the Noah Ark story. And it's one of those things where if I try to have any kind of conversation with my parents about focusing on the parts that are loving and kind and generous and that are teaching ostensibly good morals, they accuse me of cherry picking. And of course,
you are cherry picking. That's what's called using your being a good parent.
Yes. For very obvious reasons. When I have something that when a story is told to a child that causes emotional distress, just because it happens to be raining, and I could do the best I can to diffuse it with her by attempting to say, "Oh, see, we're on a big hill, and is there water coming over the porch?" And we can go through all these different steps and have her figure it out. But there's still the piece of how do I interact with my parents to keep a relationship intact without completely saying, "Nope, y'all are wrong. This is awful. This is horrible. There's even more. And what are you telling her?" And there's a lot of pieces to this.
Dale, before I let you off your leash, I wanted to say one thing, and that is to explain what's going on biologically with your child. And I want to talk about this in more detail in a future show, but it's called the arc of the tantrum, basically, and it's really applicable to any time a child goes into some sort of lizard brain state of being. When they get into that primitive mindset where it's just fear or upset of any sort, talking to them is just not going to work. And the best thing to do, if you didn't already sense this, is to stop your world. I see so many parents, you think that's obvious, but you see it in the grocery store all the time. The child is crying and the parent's just pushing the cart going. Stop your world and say, "I will hold you for as long as you need me to hold you," until they get regulated. And then you can talk. But that's just the biological, physiological thing. And Dale, go.
No, I think that's great. That's perfect. And this is we were just before your call, we were talking about the stories that are basically, require just another point of view, and then the stories across the line. And a lot of these Bible stories for a 5-year-old cross the line. They are the sort of things that lead the child to be paralyzed with fear and traumatized.
All right.
So the thing is that your parents are your in-laws. Did you say it was your parents?
They're my biological parents.
Your parents, okay. Your parents are probably seeing Bible stories as a separate category. Something that doesn't, it doesn't play by the normal rules. One of the ways that you can do this and still perfectly preserve your relationship is by helping them to break out of that. So you can say, first of all, it is like Jan said, it's your job to cherry pick as a parent. It's your job to decide which things are appropriate for your child and which are not. And if you were to tell your parents, "Hey, guess what? I'm going to show my daughter The Godfather this weekend," I think they would immediately recognize that, oh my gosh, you can't do that. A lot of people are, James Caan at the toll booth, for crying out loud. Everybody can recognize that a 5-year-old should not see James Caan at the toll booth. So what you could do is even say, to make it clear that you're not just unilaterally discarding all religious stories, you can say, okay, I want to tell her a story about this man who is angry at a town and for something they've done, and so he poisons their water, and that doesn't change their mind, and so he burns down some of their houses, and that doesn't change their minds. So at night he sneaks around to all the houses and he slits the throats of all the little babies in this town to get them to change their minds about this. And then they change their minds. I'm going to tell my daughter this story, and they're likely to say, "Oh my gosh, you can't tell her that. She's not going to be able to sleep." Well, there's the Passover story. You know, that's the story of the plagues of Egypt and the slaughter of the innocents, and which is, as Jan said, it's celebrated. It's celebrated, which is bizarre. I remember the first time I saw a picture of Noah's Ark that had all the bodies floating in the water, right? It was like a meme. It was an atheist meme or something. But the story focuses on this exciting adventure that Noah and his family are having with all the animals. And, you know, the fact that all the rest of humanity was unilaterally wiped out, those are the sorts of things that if you take it outside of the religious frame, you know, it can be helpful. And you can just say, I want my daughter to eventually have all information. But at the age of 5, there are things that she's too young to deal with emotionally. And it may seem like all Bible stories are fine. All Bible stories are fine eventually, you know, for somebody to hear and think about. But at the age of 5, it's not okay for her to be terrified to go to sleep because she's worried that God is going to flood the world. So can you please lean on love your neighbor for a while, if you're unsure about, you know, a particular story, run it by me. I think that's a reasonable thing to ask. They should be concerned that their granddaughter was reduced to tears, right? I mean, that should pull at their heartstrings a little bit. And so you can just say, I want to do what a normal parent does and help her to not be terrified by certain images and ideas, including, you know, whether or not they're in the Bible. Can we just give her the stories that are not going to cause that in her? I think that's a reasonable thing for you to ask.
I agree.
Right. Yeah, that does seem like a reasonable request. So of course, my parents are not reasonable people, and you know,
that's my
probably
concern.
a topic for another call. And you know, like for example, there's been plenty of times where they told us that no, we can't help you because my daughter, because we've got church, or I'm doing this for the church, and you know, and of course, I see a lot of cognitive dissonance in their behavior versus what they're professing and who they voted for, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, they hold these conflicting. There's a huge amount of conflict. I can see it just internally in them. They're not happy people.
Yeah, well, and if it comes to that, I think it's fine for you to say, you know what, then I'm going to have to ask no Bible stories. You know, I appreciate you helping us, you know, to watch my daughter and all that, but it's really important to me that she not have these anxiety reactions.
I'm appreciating, Dale, what you're saying, but I think that there are a lot of religious folks out there who are not very reasonable or respectful due to their own psychological need to hold on to, you know, tribalism and hold on to their ideologies. We don't have to, you know, get. I just want to point out that there is a form of emotional abuse that's called exploiting, and this is an example of that. I'm not at all suggesting that you mention any of that to your parents. I just wanted to make sure that you are aware that they are perpetrating a form of emotional abuse by living their faith through your child and not respecting your child's individual needs.
Right.
So just kind of set that out there. Question for you: how? What is your need with them taking care of? And I'm not even making, again, this is not because I'm coming at it with a suggestion. I just wanted to know the background a little bit more. How necessary? Huh?
Yeah. The background, oh boy. Yeah, I could say in a nutshell, we had a 27-week baby. We spent 121 days in a neonatal intensive care unit. She came home with a feeding tube, and for the last, first 3 years, we had severe insomnia because of her feeding schedule, up every 3 hours, and we are completely exhausted. And we need help, and we've kind of exhausted our resources in terms of ability to, have, friends or professional babysitters all the time. She's in school now, but, we're still we're depleted emotionally, physically, mentally.
So you need your parents to do this. This is a very, very strong need.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if you could have a discussion with them without your daughter there. Just sit down with the two of them and explain to them that you so appreciate what they're doing for you, how much it's helpful to you.
How important it is to their grandchild as well, I'm sure.
Yeah, and that they're spending time together, but at the same time that you do have very particular choices that you make in terms of what kind of reading material that your daughter is exposed to. And one criterion for you is that you don't want to have any kind of violent story shared with her.
Right.
Instead of kind of focusing it so much on Bible or no Bible.
Right.
So if it were from the Bible, great, as long as there's just literally no violence in this story. Do you think that that'd be reasonable enough to at least, even if they don't agree with it, honor your request?
Right. Yeah, I think that's a really good direction to go into. And the only thing I see with that is that I don't think they would actually consider that to be a violent story.
Right.
It's a beautiful story. It's God's promise. It's the rainbow and, all that.
Okay, how about no death or injury? No death, nothing to do with death. We'll tackle that at a later age, but for now, literally just no death of anybody.
They make books. I'm surprised that they read directly from the Bible. They make religious.
They've got the children's whitewashed versions, but
still,
those are
still comes through. Yeah.
Oh, sure.
I don't advocate for those because I've run through some of those, and you have the story of John the Baptist, and it's a children's book for little kids, and they have his head bloody on the platter.
That's right. It's amazing that it just doesn't register as an issue.
That's not violence. Of course not.
Who says they don't have Halloween in the Bible?
Right?
It just might have to be, you have to figure out a way to word it so that they, really clear instructions so that they can refer to it and understand fully what the rules are.
Yeah, maybe preview the books that they're going to read to her. Say, can I please pre-approve the books you're going to read to her? Or give them a stack of books that are kind of a compromise, maybe a little even bit religious, but that you think would be okay with them and you.
Usually, though, they're books that have a whole lot of Bible stories, and so then you have to go in and say this one's good, this one's not good. They usually come in a bunch of them in one book. So usually, if it's Bible stories for children in a book, it's going to have some of the violent ones in there.
Right. But just
I've thought to try to kind of dilute it a little bit by finding other topics like, let's talk about world religion. I could share her all these different perspectives, and they're all just as bad. It seems like, and then the other thing that ends up happening though is like when my daughter comes back and starts saying these things, she's making these assertions, and she doesn't know what that is, but she's making statements. She's repeating what she's heard at grandma's house, and I don't want to contribute to an argument. So all I've done to respond to her is say, well, some people believe that.
Right.
And but then that's also gotten back, and how she's interpreted that is it's also created there. It's like a polarizing response. It's like, well, Daddy doesn't like Jesus because he says some people don't believe that.
I just want to say I really feel for you right now.
Yeah.
Because you are not in a position of power where you are in control, where you can just say, look, I want you to spend time with her, but if you're going to keep reading these kind of stories, then I'm not able to let her, you're not able to even do that. You're really at their back, at their...
Maybe you could preload your child and say, before she gets there, say, I wonder if Grandma will bake cookies with you today. And then it becomes all about the cookies, and that takes up at least a goodly chunk of the time. I don't know. Maybe Grandma will take you to a splash pad today, or to jumpaline if you're in Austin, right? Are you in Austin?
Yep.
Yeah. Jumpaline.
Yeah,
That'll kill some time.
Down the road, yeah. Yes.
Well, but perhaps he can just have that conversation directly with them about activities and that kind of thing. I just didn't. I just am concerned about the daughter being in a position where she's needing to carry through a message. And I don't know. It may not be. The most
I just know
efficient way
that grandparents in general are helpless in the face of requests from their grandchildren.
The thing is,
you're right. It shouldn't be put on the child. That's not what I mean.
And also, I'm just thinking that, of course, I don't know this couple at all, except for what we've been told today. But in other people that I have gotten to know who are very restrictive in their mentally on what's good and what's not good and how they need to do things, that I'm not sure where I was going with that. It's just really difficult to. I'm sorry. I'm not really sure where I was going with it. I'm just like still feeling for John here that we're
I feel you. That's hard.
I know that I would feel very, very helpless and stressful about being concerned that I'm not allowing my child, to go to a place where I can be sure she's feeling emotionally safe.
Right.
It's a very tough spot.
I'm sorry that
I am so sorry.
in that position.
We certainly wish you a lot of luck, and if you wouldn't mind calling back and letting us know how you're doing.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. I appreciate your taking my call today.
Absolutely. Good luck with everything.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. For folks who are looking, I don't know, but I know, Dale, that you have done this too. We were book people as when my kids were little, and I got books about all religions and mythologies and all of the stories, as it were. And one of them that we got that was one of my favorite, because it started my children down that road of looking at biblical stories that are supposed to be lovely and wonderful in a different way. And Mark, this particular book about Noah's Ark was the best one. I loved it because it actually shows pictures, like you said, Dale, of people going underwater and the animals dying. And it sounds awful and morose, like it should. But it still tells the story, and it's a teachable moment. You have to wait till the kids are at the right age for it, of course. But for us, it was a very good thing. And I'm also into good illustrations. A book with good illustrations is important to me. It's also got beautiful illustrations in it. But the other thing that it shows is something that everybody asks, but nobody has the answers for. What did they do with all the poop? And at the end, they show the ark with all the animals off of it, and it's just full of poop.
Oh, my gosh.
It's got, it does it just right. It's got a lot of reality in it. It's not just the cute little story about the rainbow and stuff. So that's a good one for parents who have children at that age, that they could handle such a thing. Boy, wow. I think we have we, how long have we been going? I don't recall what time we started. Was it a little after 3 or something? Must be about time.
I'm glad that, do we have time to continue? I just feel like
we do have a couple things we want to finish up.
Well,
right.
Okay, but I just, his name was John, right, the caller? Do we have a little bit more time to discuss that?
Sure.
I really feel for parents who are, in a position where they don't feel they can protect their children from their parents, from the grandparents, or from whoever is taking care of them and that kind of thing. So many parents are in a situation financially where they have to look to the extended family to take care of their kids. And for the price for that to be exposing the kids to stories that are not appropriate for their age, for them to be exposing them to feelings of fear and unsafety. I feel like that's just so wrong that they have to be in that position. It's just so sad to me.
Right. And it's one of those instances.
And children are paying the price.
Right.
Parents are paying some of the price, and then the grandparents sort of get their way because they're getting to do their proselytizing thing and feel so good about themselves, and they're paying no cost whatsoever.
Yeah, and they so often we hear here at the ACA, what harm does religion do? This is one of those instances where you can see that it's doing harm and the person doesn't even know it. When a person is religious, the harm that they are doing, they're often unaware of. So you need to step back if you're asking that question. Religion, what problem is it? I don't do anything bad. Step back and look at the impact that you're having, especially if it has to do with children. Fortunately, my in-laws have been very respectful of our wishes, but it sounds like John does not have that
feather in their cap. Yeah, right.
They do not have that. Was there anything else that we wanted to finish up? We did have some loose ends, but we could save them for another show if you wish. Everybody good for now? Okay. I guess there was one more thing that I wanted to get back to. I'm sorry, on the International Day of the Girl Child. Things that you can do to support children, and especially girls, is, and these are from an article in Forbes magazine, is to practice mentorship. And one way in particular that I'm aware of is in my past life, I was a teacher. I was a very good teacher, and I was very proud of how well I taught. I was very aware of all the techniques and all the things, and I would read about how boys were getting more attention and how teachers spent more time talking to them, and I thought, not me. And then I paid attention when I was teaching in a class, and by God, I was doing that. I was spending more time looking at the boys, letting them get away without putting their hands up, and this is in college, and more help to them, and the girls were just pretty much quiet most of the time. And I flipped the experiment. I completely ignored the boys. If they raised their hands, I just went to the girl that was next to them. And
wow,
the classroom changed.
Oh my gosh.
It was amazing. After I did that little experiment, that's the way I did it for the rest of the time I was teaching. And for those of you who are saying, oh, the poor boys, bullshit. I'm sorry. They get the upside of things in every other class. In my class, the girls got to shine. They became outspoken. They had strong opinions. They sat up front. We had interactions that were amazing. You could see the empowerment. And you could see the boys kind of stand back.
When you say it changed the class,
the dynamic.
Tell us about that.
The boys fairly quickly saw that I was not going to put up with them being boisterous and in my face all the time, that they needed to chill out a little bit and sit back and be respectful, for one thing, of the fact that there are other people in the room. And so there was that dynamic, but also just that the girls realized that I wanted to hear their voices, that I wasn't going to let them hide, because I think sometimes girls take advantage of that, and they sit in the back and they kind of mentally check out. None of the girls could check out in my class after that. So they were forced into being ready, knew that I would call on them, and I would pull answers out of them, get them to talk more about things. I required more of them, and they met that expectation. Wow. So many studies show that where you put your expectations, that's where they'll come. And by God, it worked. So if you're a teacher, step back and look at how you do things. You might not think you're doing it, but I would guarantee you probably are.
And if you're a parent and you have
a boy and
a girl,
right?
Or boys and girls,
yeah.
See, are you treating them differently?
Oh, I know I'm treating my boy and my girl differently.
Well, but I don't mean because they're different people.
Right.
I mean because of their gender.
Right.
And something that's not thought out necessarily.
No. I do think about that a lot. And so, yes, I agree with Jan there. You can be intentional about the media you consume, especially around girls. And I talk to my kids all the time about the media that they consume. If we're watching something, the movies that we all grew up on, there were no powerful women except for Sigourney Weaver and, let's see, the Terminator movies.
Oh.
What was her name?
The first Terminator movie.
Yeah. Well, gosh, I can't think of her name.
It was Sarah something was her character.
Yeah. She was just kick-ass and doing the pull-ups and everything. And I was so drawn to those characters. So nowadays when we have all these movies with Black Widow and Wonder Woman, geez, and so many powerful characters, that's just wallpaper for my daughter. I sit in these movies and I cry. And she's looking at me. I'm like, I'm so glad that this doesn't affect you at all. But oh my gosh, I needed this so much when I was a little girl. And so when we watch old movies and old sorts of stuff happen, we were watching a romantic comedy and this woman was being fed food by the man and she had a blindfold on. And then he just kissed her while she had the blindfold on. I was like, bodily autonomy, not cool. You need to ask first, all that stuff. So constant conversations about those things. There's that. And then they say support metrics for accountability. And what they mean there is to vote and support legislation that is important to equality. And goodness knows we have a long way to go with that. I remember as a pup, the whole brouhaha over getting the Equal Rights Amendment passed, and it never did pass. And Lordy, how can that be? It just doesn't even make sense. But there it is. So those are my parting thoughts on raising girls and just briefly some things you can do.
And we will have a segment
on boys. We will.
That'll be
and then also we'll have an episode on genderqueer and any sort of non-normative child and what that means, because that is a whole nother bag of stuff, as they say. I get it. I have my kids have friends, and it's there, and I'm so happy we are in a world where that can be okay. Oh God, it's so good. So good. Alrighty, so this has been Parenting Beyond Belief. It is a production of the Atheist Community of Austin, an educational nonprofit dedicated to the separation of government and religion and the promotion of positive atheist culture. Thank you to Dale from way over in Atlanta, and thank you to Janet. Thank you to the guys in the room next door who put this whole thing together. They're cheering. Can you hear them? Yay. There. And then thank you to the Colonel, as he is known, for our lovely graphic. I just love that so much. So we all know that parenting is a difficult thing, and we hope that we have helped you somewhat today. And now I think it's time for you to go and hug your kid. Bye. There they are. There they are. Yay, the guys.